Sarah Martinez adjusted her worn baseball cap as she made her way down the narrow airplane aisle, searching for seat 23B. Her simple jeans and faded hoodie drew curious glances from other passengers settling into the business class section. She kept her head down, clutching a small backpack that contained everything she owned. The flight from Dallas to Boston was packed with well-dressed travelers returning from business trips and vacations. Sarah felt completely out of place among the designer suits and expensive luggage. She had scraped together every penny for this economy ticket, knowing it was her only chance to make it home before it was too late. As she passed through first class, a woman in a pearl necklace wrinkled her nose and whispered loudly to her husband, "I can't believe they let just anyone on these flights anymore. Look at her clothes." Her husband nodded in agreement, adjusting his gold watch with obvious disdain. Sarah pretended not to hear the comment, though her cheeks burned with embarrassment. She had learned long ago to ignore such remarks. Her appearance often led people to make assumptions about her background and circumstances. What they didn't know was that beneath her modest exterior lay a story of incredible sacrifice and courage. Finding her middle seat, between a businessman typing furiously on his laptop and an elderly woman reading a magazine, Sarah squeezed into the cramped space. The businessman barely glanced up but immediately shifted away from her, as if her presence might somehow contaminate his expensive suit. The elderly woman beside her, Mrs. Chen, offered a kind smile. "Long flight ahead of us, dear," she said warmly. Sarah returned the smile gratefully, appreciating the first genuine kindness she had encountered since boarding. As the plane prepared for takeoff, Sarah closed her eyes and tried to calm her racing heart. She hadn't been on an airplane in over 2 years, not since her last deployment ended. The familiar sounds of the engines brought back memories she had worked hard to suppress. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the armrests. "Nervous, flyer?" Mrs. Chen asked gently, noticing Sarah's white knuckles. "Something like that," Sarah replied softly, not wanting to elaborate. How could she explain that the last time she had been in an aircraft, she was being evacuated from a combat zone with injuries that still caused her to limp on rainy days? The businessman next to her rolled his eyes at their conversation and put on expensive noise-canceling headphones. He had already decided that Sarah was probably some kind of trouble. Perhaps someone who couldn't afford to fly but had somehow managed to scrape together the money through questionable means. As the plane taxied toward the runway, Sarah pulled out a small worn photograph from her pocket. It showed a woman who looked remarkably like her, wearing a hospital gown and smiling weakly at the camera. Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she stared at the image of her mother, taken just 3 weeks ago during her last good day. The phone call that had prompted this urgent trip still echoed in her mind. Her aunt's voice had been barely above a whisper. "Sarah, you need to come home. The doctors say it's a matter of days now. She's been asking for you constantly." Sarah had been working 3 part-time jobs in a small town in Texas, trying to save money and rebuild her life after leaving the military. The news about her mother's condition had shattered her carefully constructed routine. Without hesitation, she had quit her jobs, sold what little she owned, and used every dollar to buy this plane ticket. The irony wasn't lost on her that the same passengers who looked down on her modest appearance had no idea she had once worn a uniform that commanded respect. She had spent 4 years serving her country in some of the most dangerous places on Earth, earning medals and commendations that now sat forgotten in a storage unit she could no longer afford. As the plane lifted off the ground, Sarah wondered if she would make it home in time to say goodbye to the woman who had raised her alone after her father's death. Her mother had sacrificed everything to give Sarah opportunities, working double shifts as a nurse to pay for her education and support. Her dreams of military service, the weight of her mother's love and sacrifice pressed heavily on Sarah's heart as she stared out the small window at the clouds below. She had so much she wanted to say, so many apologies to make for the years she had been away serving her country, while her mother's health slowly deteriorated. Little did Sarah know that this flight would become much more than just a journey home. The assumptions and judgments of her fellow passengers were about to be challenged in ways none of them could imagine. Sometimes the most extraordinary people come in the most ordinary packages, and today's flight was about to prove that truth in the most unexpected way. 2 hours into the flight, the mockery began in earnest. It started with hushed whispers and pointed stares. but gradually grew bolder as passengers noticed Sarah's nervous behavior during a patch of turbulence. "Look at her gripping those armrests," laughed a young man in an expensive polo shirt, seated 2 rows behind Sarah. "Probably her first time flying. Some people just don't belong in the air." His girlfriend giggled and took a photo with her phone, planning to share it on social media with a caption about interesting people you meet when you fly economy. The businessman beside Sarah, Mr. Davidson, had been growing increasingly annoyed with her presence. When she accidentally bumped his elbow while reaching for her water bottle, he finally spoke up. "Excuse me, but some of us are trying to work here. Could you please be more careful with your movements?" His tone was condescending and loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. Several heads turned to watch the interaction. Sensing drama in the making, Sarah mumbled an apology and tried to make herself smaller in the already cramped seat. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to disturb you," she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the engine noise. "Well, maybe you should have thought about that before booking a flight you clearly can't handle," Mr. Davidson replied curtly. "Some of us paid good money for a peaceful journey." A woman across the aisle joined in, her voice dripping with disdain. "Honestly, the standards for air travel have really declined. In my day, people dressed appropriately and knew how to behave in public." Sarah felt her face burn with shame as more passengers began to stare and whisper. She had faced enemy fire and life-threatening situations with courage, but this public humiliation cut deeper than any physical wound. The cruel words reminded her of her current circumstances, how far she had fallen from the confident soldier she once was. Mrs. Chen, the elderly woman beside her, squeezed Sarah's hand gently. "Pay them no mind, dear," she whispered. "Some people were raised without proper manners, but the damage was already done." Other passengers had joined the chorus of complaints and snide remarks. A group of college students began making jokes about Sarah's appearance, speculating about her background and making assumptions about her character based solely on her modest clothing. "She's probably flying somewhere to meet her parole officer," one of them joked, causing eruptions of laughter from his friends. "Or maybe she's running away from something. You know how these people are." The comments grew more vicious as passengers fed off each other's cruelty. Someone suggested that Sarah might be a security risk, pointing to her nervous behavior and the way she kept checking her phone for updates about her mother's condition. "Flight attendant," called out a man in a navy blazer, "I think we need to keep an eye on that passenger in 23B. She's been acting very suspicious since takeoff." The flight attendant, Jennifer Walsh, approached with professional courtesy, but Sarah could see the doubt in her eyes. The constant complaints from multiple passengers had planted seeds of suspicion, even in the trained crew member's mind. "Ma'am, is everything all right? Some passengers have expressed concerns about your behavior," Jennifer said diplomatically. Though her stance suggested she was prepared for trouble, Sarah's heart sank as she realized the situation was spiraling beyond her control. "I'm fine, ma'am. Just worried about my family. I'm trying to get home because my mother is in the hospital." "Sure she is," scoffed Mr. Davidson. "That's what they all say, probably just making up stories to gain sympathy." The accusation stung because Sarah's story was painfully true. Every minute in the air was a minute closer to potentially losing her mother forever. And these strangers were treating her like a criminal simply because she didn't fit their image of a proper passenger. "I have documentation if you need to see it," Sarah offered quietly, reaching for her backpack where she kept the hospital papers and her mother's medical records. "Don't bother," interrupted the woman with the pearl necklace. "People like you always have some sob story ready. We just want a peaceful flight without disruptions." The entire economy section had become focused on the drama unfolding around Sarah's seat. Passengers craned their necks to get a better view of the woman who had become the target of their collective disdain. Some took photos and videos, planning to share the incident online as entertainment. What none of them realized was that their cruel entertainment was devastating a woman who had already sacrificed more for their safety and freedom than they could possibly imagine. Sarah sat in silence, absorbing their hatred while her heart broke not just from their words, but from the knowledge that each passing minute brought her closer to potentially arriving too late to say goodbye to the most important person in her life. The mob mentality had taken hold, and Sarah found herself completely alone except for Mrs. Chen's quiet support. She closed her eyes and tried to remember her military training about enduring difficult situations, but this felt different. This was personal, attacking her very worth as a human being. As the harassment continued, Sarah retreated deeper into herself, trying to block out the cruel voices surrounding her. She focused on the photograph of her mother, using it as an anchor to maintain her composure. The military had taught her to endure difficult situations, but nothing had prepared her for this kind of personal attack from civilians she was trying to protect. The situation escalated when a passenger named Robert Sterling, a wealthy real estate developer, stood up and addressed the cabin loudly. "I think we all deserve to know who exactly we're flying with today. This woman has been acting suspicious since we boarded, and I, for one, don't feel safe." His declaration prompted murmurs of agreement from other passengers. Several people began demanding that the flight crew take action, suggesting that Sarah should be moved to a different section or even removed from the flight entirely. "She's making everyone uncomfortable," added a woman traveling with her teenage daughter. "My child shouldn't have to be exposed to whatever problems this person has brought on board." Sarah felt tears threatening to spill as the attacks became more personal and vindictive. She had spent years in combat zones protecting the very freedoms these people were exercising to humiliate her. The irony was almost unbearable. Mrs. Chen had heard enough. Despite her small stature and advanced age, she stood up with surprising authority. "You should all be ashamed of yourselves," she declared, her voice carrying clearly through the cabin. "You're attacking this young woman based on nothing but your own prejudices and assumptions." "Oh, please," scoffed Mr. Davidson. "Don't tell me you're going to defend her behavior. She's clearly out of place here." "The only people out of place here are those who have forgotten basic human decency," Mrs. Chen replied firmly. "This woman has done nothing wrong except fail to meet your superficial standards of appearance." Her defense of Sarah only seemed to anger the mob further. Several passengers began arguing with Mrs. Chen, telling her to mind her own business and stop enabling what they saw as suspicious behavior. The flight attendant, Jennifer, found herself in an increasingly difficult position. The complaints were mounting, and she could feel the tension in the cabin reaching a dangerous level. She had been trained to handle disruptive passengers, but this situation was different. The disruption seemed to be coming from multiple passengers targeting one woman who hadn't actually done anything wrong. "Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats and lower your voices," Jennifer announced over the intercom. "We're experiencing some turbulence ahead, and I need everyone to remain calm and seated." But the announcement did little to calm the situation. If anything, it seemed to embolden some passengers who interpreted the flight attendant's neutral response as validation of their concerns. A businessman from first class had wandered back to see what the commotion was about. After observing for a few minutes, he approached Jennifer with an air of authority. "As a frequent flyer and platinum member, I'm requesting that you move that disruptive passenger to a different location. She's clearly causing problems for everyone around her. Sir, I understand your concerns, but the passenger in question hasn't actually violated any airline policies," Jennifer replied diplomatically, though her confidence was wavering under the pressure from so many complaints. "Not violated any policies yet," the businessman emphasized. "But are we really going to wait until something happens? I think prevention is better than dealing with an incident at 30,000 feet. Sarah overheard this conversation and felt her last thread of hope beginning to snap. She had endured physical pain, emotional trauma, and financial hardship, but this public humiliation was breaking her in ways she hadn't thought possible. She began to consider asking to be moved herself, just to escape the torment, when she remembered her mother's words from their last phone conversation. "Sarah, baby, you've always been stronger than you know. Whatever challenges you face, remember that you have the heart of a lion." Drawing on that memory and her military training, Sarah straightened her shoulders slightly. She wouldn't give these people the satisfaction of seeing her completely broken. She had survived situations far more dangerous than a plane full of judgmental passengers. Meanwhile, unknown to the passengers, Captain Michael Rodriguez had been monitoring the situation through reports from his crew. A 30-year veteran of both military and commercial aviation, he was growing concerned about the escalating tension in the cabin. What had started as passenger complaints was beginning to sound like systematic harassment of an individual. He made a decision that would change everything. Captain Rodriguez quietly asked his co-pilot to take control, while he stepped back to assess the situation personally. As he prepared to enter the passenger area, he had no idea that he was about to discover something that would shock him to his core and completely transform the atmosphere of the entire flight. Captain Rodriguez emerged from the cockpit with the practiced authority of someone who had commanded both military aircraft and commercial flights for decades. His presence immediately commanded attention as passengers noticed the distinguished man in uniform making his way through the cabin. "What seems to be the problem here?" he asked Jennifer, his voice calm but carrying an undertone that suggested he was prepared to handle whatever situation had developed. Multiple passengers began speaking at once, eager to present their version of events to the captain. Mr. Davidson was the loudest, insisting that Sarah represented some kind of security risk and demanding immediate action. "Captain, we've been trying to tell your crew that this passenger has been acting very suspiciously since boarding," Robert Sterling declared, pointing directly at Sarah. "She's making everyone uncomfortable with her nervous behavior and inappropriate appearance." Captain Rodriguez surveyed the scene with experienced eyes. He had seen real security threats during his military service and knew the difference between genuine danger and passenger prejudice. What he observed was a young woman sitting quietly in her seat, clearly distressed but showing no signs of actual threatening behavior. "Ma'am?" He addressed Sarah directly, his tone respectful but professional. "I'm Captain Rodriguez. I understand there's been some concern about your travel today. Is everything all right?" Sarah looked up at the captain, surprised by his courteous approach. After hours of harassment, his professional demeanor felt like a lifeline. "Yes, sir. I'm just trying to get home to see my mother. She's in the hospital and—" Her voice caught slightly. "The doctors say I might not have much time." Something in her voice, the way she addressed him as sir with automatic military respect, caught Captain Rodriguez's attention. He had heard that particular tone thousands of times during his Air Force career. "I'm sorry to hear about your mother," he said gently. "Can I ask, have you had military experience?" "You have a familiar way of speaking." The question hung in the air like electricity. Sarah hesitated, uncertain whether revealing her background would help or hurt her situation. The passengers around her grew quiet, sensing that something significant was about to happen. "Yes, sir," Sarah replied quietly. "I served 4 years in the Army. Just got out about 2 years ago." Captain Rodriguez felt his expression change as pieces of a puzzle began falling into place. The respectful manner, the composure under pressure, the way she carried herself despite the harassment, it all made sense now. "What was your rank and unit, soldier?" he asked, using the term of address that immediately transformed the dynamic of the conversation. "Sergeant Sarah Martinez, sir, 75th Ranger Regiment, 2nd Battalion," she replied, automatically straightening her posture as years of military training took over. The words hit Captain Rodriguez like a physical blow. The 75th Ranger Regiment was one of the most elite units in the U.S. Army. These weren't ordinary soldiers. They were special operations forces who underwent some of the most rigorous training in the military. His face went pale as the full implications sank in. This woman, who had been mocked and harassed for the past several hours, was a decorated Army Ranger, one of the most highly trained and elite soldiers in the American military. "Rangers lead the way," he said quietly, giving the regiment's motto as both a recognition and an apology. "All the way, sir," Sarah responded automatically, completing the traditional exchange. The passengers nearby began to realize that something profound had just happened, though most didn't yet understand the significance. The businessman, Mr. Davidson, however, was growing impatient with what he saw as unnecessary conversation. "Captain, with all due respect, I don't see how her employment history is relevant to the security concerns we've raised," he interrupted. "We just want to ensure a safe flight for all passengers." Captain Rodriguez turned to Mr. Davidson with a look that could have frozen water. His voice, when he spoke, carried the full weight of his authority and barely contained anger. "Employment history?" he repeated slowly. "Sir, this woman didn't have a job. She served as an Army Ranger, which means she's among the most elite soldiers our country has ever produced. She has likely seen more combat and shown more courage in a single deployment than most people show in their entire lives." The cabin fell completely silent. Passengers who had been loudly demanding action against Sarah suddenly found themselves speechless as the reality of their behavior began to dawn on them. Captain Rodriguez continued, his voice growing stronger. Army Rangers don't just serve. They lead dangerous missions, often behind enemy lines, with a level of skill and bravery that most of us can barely imagine. This woman has probably saved more lives and defended our freedom more directly than anyone else on this aircraft. Sarah sat in stunned silence, overwhelmed by the captain's defense of her service. After years of feeling forgotten and overlooked as a veteran struggling to readjust to civilian life, having someone recognize and honor her sacrifice felt almost surreal. The atmosphere in the cabin transformed completely as Captain Rodriguez's words sank in. Passengers who had been loudly voicing complaints just moments before now sat in uncomfortable silence, the weight of their behavior becoming painfully clear. Sergeant Martinez, Captain Rodriguez continued, his voice filled with respect. On behalf of this airline and as a fellow veteran, I want to apologize for the treatment you've received today. What these passengers have done is not just wrong. It's a disgrace to the very freedoms you fought to protect. Mr. Davidson's face had gone red with embarrassment and anger. Rather than acknowledging his mistake, he doubled down on his position. Captain, I don't care what her background is. Her behavior on this flight has been disruptive, and we have a right to feel safe. Disruptive. Captain Rodriguez's voice rose slightly, his military bearing becoming more pronounced. This soldier has been sitting quietly in her seat while traveling to see her dying mother. The only disruption on this aircraft has come from passengers who chose to attack someone based on their appearance. He turned to address the entire cabin, his voice carrying to every passenger. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to understand something. The woman you've been harassing for the past several hours is Sergeant Sarah Martinez, an Army Ranger who has served multiple combat deployments in Afghanistan and Iraq. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the cabin as passengers began to grasp the magnitude of their error. Some looked down in shame while others stared at Sarah with new understanding. Army Rangers, the captain continued, represent less than 1% of the military. They volunteer for the most dangerous missions and undergo training that breaks most people. While you were safe in your homes, Sergeant Martinez was likely leading missions to eliminate terrorist threats and protect American lives. Mrs. Chen squeezed Sarah's hand tighter, tears in her eyes as she realized the true character of the young woman she had been defending. "Oh, my dear," she whispered. "I had no idea." Robert Sterling, the real estate developer who had demanded action against Sarah, now looked physically ill. The realization that he had publicly attacked a combat veteran was clearly devastating to whatever self-image he had maintained. Captain Rodriguez wasn't finished. He pulled out his phone and made a quick call to the airline's customer service department. "This is Captain Rodriguez on Flight 447. I need to speak with your supervisor immediately about upgrading a passenger." While he waited for the call to connect, he turned back to Sarah. "Sergeant, I know this doesn't undo what happened, but I'd like to move you to first class for the remainder of the flight. You've more than earned that comfort." Sarah shook her head, overwhelmed by the sudden reversal of fortune. "Sir, that's not necessary. I just want to get home to my mother." "It's not about necessity, soldier. It's about respect," Captain Rodriguez replied firmly. "Someone who has served our country with the distinction of an Army Ranger should never have to endure what you've experienced today." The college students who had been making jokes earlier looked mortified. One of them, a young man named Jake, stood up tentatively. "Ma'am, I'm really sorry. We had no idea. What we said was completely wrong." His apology opened the floodgates. Other passengers began offering their own apologies, many struggling to find words adequate for the situation. The woman with the pearl necklace was crying, repeatedly saying, "I'm so sorry," while her husband sat in stunned silence. But not everyone was ready to accept responsibility. Mr. Davidson, perhaps feeling cornered by the collective shift in opinion, made one last attempt to justify his behavior. "This doesn't change the fact that she was acting suspiciously. How are we supposed to know her background?" Captain Rodriguez's expression hardened as he addressed the businessman directly. "Sir, suspicious behavior? She was nervous about flying while worried about her dying mother. The only suspicious behavior I've witnessed today has been the systematic harassment of a passenger based on their appearance and perceived social status." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "But you raise an interesting point about not knowing her background. Here's something you should know. Every single day, veterans return from service and struggle to readjust to civilian life. Many face unemployment, homelessness, and medical challenges stemming from their service. Instead of recognizing their sacrifice, they often face exactly the kind of judgment and discrimination you've displayed today. Sarah felt tears finally beginning to flow, as the captain's words validated years of struggle and frustration. Since leaving the military, she had encountered countless situations where her service was either unknown or dismissed, where people made assumptions about her worth based on superficial observations. The businessman fell silent, unable to mount any further defense of his actions. Around the cabin, passengers were beginning to understand that they had not just misjudged one person, but had participated in a broader pattern of disrespect toward those who had served their country. Captain Rodriguez completed his call and turned back to Sarah with a gentle smile. "Sergeant Martinez, your seat in first class is ready whenever you'd like to move, and I've arranged for priority assistance when we land to help you get to the hospital as quickly as possible." As Sarah gathered her belongings to move to first class, the transformation in the cabin's atmosphere was remarkable. Passengers who had been her harshest critics now watched with deep shame and regret as she prepared to leave their section. Mrs. Chen stood up and embraced Sarah warmly. "My dear, I am so proud to have sat beside you today. Your mother raised a true hero." The elderly woman's words carried such genuine warmth that Sarah felt her composure finally begin to crack. "Thank you for defending me when no one else would," Sarah replied, her voice thick with emotion. "Your kindness meant everything." As Sarah made her way toward first class, something unexpected happened. Jake, the college student who had earlier mocked her, stood up and began to clap. The applause was hesitant at first, but it quickly spread throughout the cabin as other passengers joined in, rising to their feet in a spontaneous standing ovation. The sound was overwhelming. Sarah had received military honors and commendations, but this recognition felt different, more personal and healing. These were the same people who had spent hours attacking her, now acknowledging not just their mistake but her worth and sacrifice. Captain Rodriguez escorted Sarah personally to her new seat in first class, where the flight attendants had prepared special accommodations. They had upgraded her meal, provided extra pillows and blankets, and even found a phone charger so she could stay in contact with the hospital about her mother's condition. "Sergeant," Captain Rodriguez said as he helped her settle in, "I want you to know that what happened today was not representative of how most Americans feel about our veterans. Most people are deeply grateful for your service, even if they don't always know how to express it." "I understand, sir," Sarah replied. "Sometimes people just don't know. I've learned not to take it personally." "But you shouldn't have to learn that," the captain responded firmly. "You should be able to travel without harassment, work without discrimination, and live without having to constantly prove your worth to people who have never made the sacrifices you've made." Back in economy class, the mood remained somber as passengers grappled with their behavior. Many were sharing their thoughts and feelings about what had transpired, trying to understand how they had so badly misjudged the situation. Robert Sterling, the real estate developer, was particularly shaken. He approached Mrs. Chen, who had returned to her seat. "Ma'am, I need to ask you something. How did you know to defend her when the rest of us didn't?" Mrs. Chen looked at him with patient eyes. "I didn't know about her military service, if that's what you're asking. I defended her because she was a human being who was being treated cruelly for no good reason. Her service record is remarkable, but even without it, she deserved basic human dignity." Her words hit him like a physical blow as he realized the deeper implications of what she was saying. Sarah's military service made the situation more poignant, but their behavior would have been wrong regardless of her background. Meanwhile, Jennifer, the flight attendant, was struggling with her own feelings about the incident. She had been trained to handle difficult situations, but she had failed to protect a passenger from harassment. She made her way to first class to check on Sarah personally. "Ma'am, I owe you an apology," Jennifer said quietly. "I should have done more to stop what was happening. I let those passengers intimidate me into doubting my own judgment." "You were in a difficult position," Sarah replied graciously. "I don't blame you for trying to keep the peace." "But that's just it," Jennifer continued. "Keeping the peace shouldn't mean allowing injustice to continue. I should have stood up for you from the beginning." As the flight continued, word of the incident spread throughout the aircraft. Passengers, In other sections, learned about what had happened and began visiting Sarah in first class to offer their own apologies and expressions of gratitude for her service. A businessman from the back of the plane approached with his young son. "Ma'am, I wanted my boy to meet you. I've been telling him about heroes, and I realized he was sitting just a few rows away from a real one." The child, maybe 8 years old, looked up at Sarah with wide eyes full of admiration. "My dad says you helped keep our country safe. Thank you." Sarah knelt down to the child's level, smiling despite her emotional exhaustion. "You're very welcome, sweetheart. But remember, there are heroes everywhere. Teachers, doctors, firefighters, police officers, and even ordinary people who help others when they need it most." Captain Rodriguez made several announcements over the intercom during the remainder of the flight, each one serving to educate passengers about veteran issues and the importance of treating all travelers with dignity and respect. "Ladies and gentlemen, today's flight has reminded us all of an important lesson," he announced as they approached Boston. "We share this country with many unsung heroes who have sacrificed for our freedoms. Let's make sure we treat every person we encounter with the respect and kindness they deserve." As they prepared for landing, Sarah received a text message from the hospital. Her heart raced as she read it, fearing the worst news about her mother's condition. The text message from the hospital brought tears of relief to Sarah's eyes. Her mother's condition had stabilized overnight, and the doctors were cautiously optimistic that she might have more time than originally predicted. Sarah immediately called the hospital and spoke briefly with her aunt, who assured her that while her mother was weak, she was alert and asking for her constantly. As the plane touched down in Boston, Captain Rodriguez made one final announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have arrived at our destination. Before you disembark, I want to remind you that today you met an American hero. Sergeant Sarah Martinez represents the best of our military, and I hope this experience has reminded all of us to look beyond appearances and treat each person we encounter with dignity and respect." The landing was smooth, and as soon as the seatbelt sign was turned off, something remarkable happened. Instead of the usual rush to grab luggage and exit quickly, passengers remained seated, allowing Sarah to deplane first. Many stood in the aisles, applauding again as she made her way toward the exit. Mr. Davidson, the businessman who had been her harshest critic, was waiting in the aisle as she passed. His face was etched with genuine remorse as he spoke. "Sergeant Martinez, I need you to know that I am deeply ashamed of my behavior today. I have a son serving in the Marines, and if anyone treated him the way I treated you—" He couldn't finish the sentence, overcome with emotion. "Sir," Sarah replied gently, "I appreciate your apology. I hope this experience helps us all remember to give each other the benefit of the doubt." As Sarah reached the jetway, Captain Rodriguez was waiting to escort her personally through the airport. True to his word, he had arranged for priority assistance to help her reach the hospital as quickly as possible. "Sergeant, before you go, I want you to have this," he said, handing her his business card along with something else, a letter of recommendation. "I've written a letter detailing your conduct under extremely difficult circumstances today. If you ever need employment references or assistance navigating veteran services, please don't hesitate to contact me." Sarah was overwhelmed by his kindness. "Sir, you've already done so much. I don't know how to thank you." "You thank me by continuing to be the outstanding person you clearly are," he replied, "and by letting me know how your mother is doing." The airline had arranged for a car service to take Sarah directly to the hospital, another gesture that Captain Rodriguez had organized. As they drove through Boston traffic, Sarah reflected on the extraordinary day she had experienced. Her phone buzzed with notifications throughout the ride. Somehow, word of the incident had spread on social media, but not in the way she had feared. Instead of becoming a viral victim, she had become a symbol of the unseen heroes among us. Passengers from the flight had shared positive stories about her grace under pressure and her military service. Mrs. Chen had posted a thoughtful message about the importance of kindness and the hidden struggles that many people face. Even some of the passengers who had initially harassed Sarah shared posts about learning from their mistakes and the need to treat veterans with respect. When Sarah arrived at the hospital, she was greeted by her Aunt Maria, who embraced her tightly. "Your mother has been waiting for you, mija. She's weak, but her spirit is strong." Sarah hurried to her mother's room, where she found Elena Martinez sleeping peacefully. Even in her weakened state, her mother's face lit up when she opened her eyes and saw her daughter. "My brave girl," Elena whispered, reaching out to touch Sarah's face. "I knew you would make it home to me." "I'm here, Mama," Sarah replied, taking her mother's frail hand in both of hers. "I'm not going anywhere." As they talked quietly, Sarah shared the story of her flight, though she downplayed the harassment and focused on the kindness she eventually received. Her mother listened with knowing eyes, having raised a daughter who often minimized her own struggles to protect others from worry. "You know, Mitya," Elena said softly, "your father would be so proud of the woman you've become. Not just because you're a soldier, but because you have such a generous heart. Even after people treat you badly, you find ways to forgive them." Over the following days, Sarah remained at her mother's bedside as Elena's condition gradually improved. The doctors were amazed by her recovery, attributing it partly to the emotional boost of having her daughter home. During this time, Sarah's story continued to spread, but in ways that brought positive attention to veteran issues. Captain Rodriguez visited the hospital during his layover, bringing flowers and updates from the airline. The company had decided to implement new training programs for crew members about recognizing and preventing passenger harassment, using Sarah's experience as a case study. "Your grace under pressure has led to real changes," he told her. "Other airlines are adopting similar programs. You've helped ensure that no veteran or any passenger has to endure what you went through." Several of the passengers from the flight also reached out. Mrs. Chen sent a beautiful card with a heartfelt note about dignity and respect. Even Mr. Davidson had written a lengthy letter, sharing how the experience had changed his perspective and led him to volunteer with veteran support organizations. The college students who had initially mocked Sarah organized a fundraiser at their university to support veteran services, raising thousands of dollars in just a few weeks. Their social media posts about learning from their mistakes and the importance of looking beyond appearances reached hundreds of thousands of people. 2 weeks later, as Sarah sat reading to her mother in the hospital garden, Elena was strong enough to walk short distances, and her prognosis had improved dramatically. The doctors now spoke of months or even years rather than days. "You know what I think happened on that airplane?" Elena asked thoughtfully. "What's that, Mama?" "I think God put you exactly where you needed to be. Not just to get home to me, but to teach those people something important. Sometimes we have to go through difficult things so others can learn and grow." Sarah considered her mother's words. The experience had been painful, but it had also led to meaningful conversations about how society treats veterans and the importance of looking beyond surface appearances. Her story had sparked discussions in schools, workplaces, and communities across the country. A month later, Sarah received an unexpected invitation. The airline wanted to honor her at their annual award ceremony, not as a victim, but as someone whose dignity and grace had inspired positive changes throughout the industry. Captain Rodriguez would be presenting the award, and several of her fellow passengers, including Mrs. Chen and even Mr. Davidson, planned to attend. "I don't need an award for being treated with basic respect," Sarah initially protested when Captain Rodriguez called with the invitation. "This isn't about what happened to you," he explained. "It's about how you handled it and how your response has made things better for others. That's what real heroes do. They turn their struggles into strength for other people." As Sarah prepared for the ceremony, wearing her dress uniform for the first time in years, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The flight that had started as a race to reach her dying mother had become a catalyst for change and understanding. Her mother, now recovering steadily and able to travel, would be her guest at the ceremony. Together, they would represent not just Sarah's individual story, but the millions of military families who sacrifice for their country and sometimes struggle to find their place in civilian society. Standing before the mirror in her hotel room, adjusting her service ribbons and badges, Sarah realized that her most important mission hadn't ended when she left the military. It had simply taken a different form, helping bridge the gap between military and civilian communities. One conversation and one changed heart at a time. The young woman who had boarded that plane in worn jeans and a baseball cap had been transformed, not by the recognition or awards, but by the realization that even in her darkest moments, she had the power to inspire others and create positive change. As she prepared to address the audience at the ceremony, Sarah thought about the words she would share. She would talk about second chances, about the importance of looking beyond appearances, and about how every person carries invisible battles and untold stories of courage. Most importantly, she would remind everyone that heroes come in all forms. Sometimes they're in uniform, and sometimes they're in everyday clothes, quietly serving their communities and families with the same dedication they once showed their country. The real measure of a person isn't in what they wear or how they appear, but in how they treat others and how they respond when faced with adversity. The flight that had begun with mockery and judgment had ended with understanding and respect, proving that even the most difficult experiences can become opportunities for growth, connection, and positive change.